Fragments of archaeological records recovered beneath the sealed strata of the Imperial Palace speak of artifacts encased in auramite dust and shadowed by millennia of secrecy. Among these fragments are descriptions of engines that resemble statues brought to life, war machines whose form cannot be mistaken for those of the Adeptus Astartes, despite superficial similarity. Incomplete picked captures show fragments of a torso plate gilded with intricate patterns, while preserved inscriptions hint at the Custodian Guard. These recovered pieces are often presented only under strict oversight, for the subjects of their study are not intended to enter common records. Early scholars who examined the fragments described chassis larger than most Contemptor frames and more elaborate in their ornamentation, as if the machine was designed not only to function, but to embody the ceremonial majesty of Terra's guardians. Eyewitness reports, though rare, corroborate the existence of such constructs. Servitors attached to the palace infrastructure have recorded glimpses of immense figures move through reinforced transit corridors. The descriptions consistently point toward towering engines clad in auramite, their profiles bearing unmistakable resemblance to the Custodian Guard. To observers outside the circle of full knowledge, these war machines appeared as gilded statues animated by hidden power. Even among Imperial officials, the sight of one of these relics provoked uncertainty as to whether they were to be considered machines, extensions of warriors, or living relics of the Emperor's will. The fragmented sources, both material and anecdotal, align to a single identity confirmed by restricted Administratum and Mechanicus documents, the Galatus Dreadnought of the Adeptus Custodes. From technical assessments of surviving examples, the Galatus is measured as larger and heavier than the Contemptor, upon which its lineage is based. Average height is recorded at approximately 5 meters when fully upright, surpassing most Astartes dreadnoughts by a narrow margin. Its weight ranges from 12 to 15 metric tons depending on configuration, with auramite plating contributing significantly to mass. The choice of auramite was deliberate, a material both durable and symbolic, aligning with the martial identity of the Custodian Guard. Its resilience exceeded ceramite and plasteel composites, rendering the Galatus capable of withstanding punishment that would cripple or destroy lesser dreadnoughts. The distinctive traits of the Galatus are evident in its external design. The torso features reinforced curvature, suggesting both practical protection for the sarcophagus within and visual continuity with Custodian armor. The faceplate recalls the traditional helmet of the Guard, creating the impression that the interred warrior still stands among his peers. Ornamentation is not incidental but structural, carved into the plating rather than applied, signaling that the dreadnought was intended to be as much a symbolic presence as a tactical instrument. Limbs are heavily reinforced yet retain a surprising degree of articulation, ensuring that the Galatus moves with more grace than its mass might suggest. The internal systems differ from common dreadnoughts in ways still only partially understood. Reports suggest that the sarcophagus is designed specifically for the physiology and psychic stability of a custodian. The neural interfaces align with custodian reflexes and thought patterns, minimizing latency and allowing the interred warrior to maintain a sense of identity largely intact. This stands in contrast to the fate of many Astartes dreadnoughts, whose pilots often describe a diminished or disjointed existence. For the Galatus, records imply that the interred custodian remains as vigilant and aware as in life, continuing his duties with unbroken resolve. In combat, the Galatus occupies a role both symbolic and practical. Its presence on the battlefield communicates the gravity of the conflict, for the deployment of such a relic is never undertaken lightly. In defensive actions, the Galatus functions as a bulwark, capable of absorbing concentrated fire while maintaining unrelenting pressure on advancing enemies. Equipped with both close-range and ranged weaponry, it provides a flexible yet durable anchor for custodian formations. Unlike dreadnoughts of the Adeptus Astartes, which are often integrated into diverse tactical doctrines, the Galatus is deployed primarily to protect critical sites, corridors, or objectives of supreme importance. It is an extension of the custodian mandate, guardianship above all. The lifestyle of a custodian interred within the Galatus is shaped by both continuity and transformation. Life support systems preserve biological function, while neural links sustain awareness. There is no suggestion that the warrior becomes diminished in spirit. On the contrary, scattered testimonies indicate that custodians embrace this state with the same solemnity as their living service. The Galatus thus represents not exile into mechanical half-existence, but an extension of eternal duty. The interred warrior is still counted among the ranks of his brethren, his voice carried through machine resonators, and his will executed through auramite plating and power field generators. Accounts from engagements where the Galatus has appeared show consistency in combat behavior. The machine advances with measured precision rather than reckless speed, striking decisively and retreating only when objectives are secured. The interred custodian is said to retain instinctive battlefield awareness, coordinating seamlessly with his living peers. This instinctive synchronization reinforces the view that the Galatus does not create separation between warrior and machine, but unites them into a single extension of the custodian ethos. The combination of archaeological fragments, eyewitness testimony, and restricted technical data all point to a single conclusion. The Galatus Dreadnought is not merely a variant of the Contemptor pattern, but a wholly distinct development, shaped to meet the requirements of the Custodian Guard. Its origins lie in the necessity of preserving irreplaceable warriors. Its dimensions and traits reflect both durability and symbolism. Its role in combat emphasizes guardianship over conquest. Its lifestyle for the interred custodian represents continuity rather than decline. Taken together, these factors establish the Galatus as one of the most unique and closely guarded dreadnought classes within the Imperium. The integration of a custodian into a Galatus dreadnought begins not with technology, but with ceremony. Accounts held within the sealed annals of the Adeptus Administratum suggest that when a custodian is mortally wounded yet not beyond preservation, his fate is determined by conclaves held deep within the palace. Unlike the Adeptus Astartes, whose dreadnought programs operate as a practical extension of battlefield doctrine, the Custodes do not treat internment as an inevitability. For them, it is the final act of salvaging a warrior whose value to the Imperium remains beyond measure. This process is undertaken only in circumstances where the warrior's knowledge, instinct, and proven record of service make his continued existence indispensable. Thus, integration into a Galatus is rare, and when it occurs it is regarded as a continuation of sacred duty rather than a reduction of humanity. The physical process of integration requires machinery of extreme sophistication. The sarcophagus within the Galatus frame is designed not merely to preserve life, but to stabilize the enhanced biology of a custodian indefinitely. Extensive neural interfaces establish a direct channel between the warrior's cognitive patterns and the dreadnaught's machine spirit. These interfaces are tailored to custodian physiology, which differs in countless subtle ways from that of an Astartes. Every fibre, every organ, and every reflex of a custodian has been refined beyond standard transhuman design, and so the Galatus sarcophagus contains stabilizers and regulators not found in lesser patterns. Reports from the Mechanicus confirm that redundancy within these systems is extreme. Multiple overlapping safeguards ensure that no sudden disconnection or degradation of awareness can occur. Once integration is complete, the warrior does not describe his condition as slumber or half-life. Where Astartes dreadnoughts often enter extended periods of torpor, to be awakened only for war, the custodian within a Galatus is reported to remain active and aware. He is part of the living ranks, communicating with his peers, attending ceremonies, and observing his watch from within the armoured form. This integration transforms him not into a diminished echo, but into an enduring sentinel whose vigilance is uninterrupted. The harmony between machine and warrior is such that many external observers find it difficult to determine where one ends and the other begins. The technological foundation of the Galatus reflects its singular role. Its weapons are purpose-built, not generalized. The most iconic configuration is the Galatus Warblade, a massive guardian spear adapted for dreadnought scale. This weapon combines the sweeping melee capacity of a blade with integrated range capability, allowing the Galatus to engage at multiple distances. The warblade is shaped to echo the Custodian Guardian spear carried by living warriors, reinforcing the symbolic continuity between them. Beyond the spear, the Galatus frame can mount inbuilt armament such as Lastrum storm bolters, weapons calibrated for precision as well as volume of fire. Unlike the heavy siege armaments often favoured by Astartes dreadnoughts, the Galatus loadout emphasises control, versatility and ceremonial alignment with Custodian doctrine. Additional gear includes layers of auramite plating inscribed with sigils of protection. These are not only decorative but functional, serving as focusing points for power fields that reinforce structural integrity. Defensive measures are further augmented by inbuilt shield generators, enabling the Galatus to withstand plasma fire, melter weaponry, and even focused energy beams that would overwhelm lesser constructs. Mobility is preserved by advanced articulation, allowing the Dreadnought to traverse palace corridors and starship decks with the precision demanded by its role. The entire frame is designed to be as responsive as possible, not a lumbering giant but a measured extension of Custodian reflexes. Tools integrated within the Galatus extend beyond weapons. Life support reservoirs, self-repairing subsystems and redundant energy channels allow for extended operation without external maintenance. This independence is crucial, for Custodians may be required to hold positions for indefinite durations. The Dreadnought is capable of maintaining operational function for decades if necessary, with its pilot remaining conscious and active throughout. In this sense, the Galatus is both weapon and sanctuary, sustaining its occupant as much as empowering him. The place of Galatus dreadnoughts within Custodian social structure is complex. Unlike Astartes chapters, where dreadnoughts form a distinct echelon of venerated ancients, the Custodians view their interred brethren as continuous members of their order. They are not placed apart nor confined to chambers of slumber. Instead, they are integrated fully into the Custodian hierarchy, participating in decisions, guarding halls, and lending their voices to councils when required. Their perspectives, enriched by centuries of living service and extended existence, are valued with the same weight as any other Custodian. In this way, the Galatus pilot retains dignity and agency, never reduced to a relic or tool. Leadership within the Custodian Guard is distributed according to merit and assignment rather than rigid rank structures, and Galatus dreadnoughts are woven into this model seamlessly. They may command operations, direct defenses, or serve as honoured advisors. The values of the Custodes, vigilance, loyalty, and the eternal mandate to guard the Emperor remain unchanged in their interred state. The machine does not impose a new identity, but extends the warrior's existing one. This integration of social status ensures that no fracture develops between the living Custodians and those within dreadnoughts. The order remains unified, every warrior, flesh or auramite, aligned under a single duty. Accounts describe the interred Custodians as embodying patience and stability. While their living counterparts may rotate through diverse assignments and deployments, the Galatus often anchors the most critical defensive positions. Their presence in throne room corridors, palace gates, or high-orbit defense stations is seen as reassurance that these positions cannot fall. The lifestyle of the interred warrior thus becomes a fusion of eternal watchfulness and active contribution. It is a life stripped of transience, a direct expression of the Custodian ethos. There is no end to service, only continuation in a different form. Observers outside the Order sometimes describe the Galatus as tragic, seeing only the confinement of a once-living warrior within a machine shell. Yet internal testimony, scarce as it is, presents a different picture. The warrior does not regard himself as diminished but as fulfilled, able to continue serving without limit. His identity is preserved, his purpose clarified, his voice still heard among his brothers. In this sense, the Galatus is not a prison, but a vessel of continuity, a convergence of technology, tradition, and values. The Galatus Dreadnought is not a common sight, and this rarity has ensured that each instance of its deployment leaves a lasting impression upon the historical record. Unlike the more widespread dreadnoughts of the Adeptus Astartes, which exist in the thousands across the Imperium, the Galatus lineage numbers only in the dozens, perhaps fewer when restricted to those still active in the current era. Each represents not only an individual custodian preserved beyond mortal injury, but also an investment of resources, secrecy, and intent by the Emperor's inner guard. As such, records of their actions carry significance disproportionate to their actual number. The most prominent examples of Galatus service appear in the defense of the Imperial Palace during the Horus Heresy. While accounts are fragmentary, Mechanicus reports mention gilded dreadnought forms moving through the web of fortifications, securing breaches and anchoring lines against the legions who assaulted Terra. One eyewitness account, preserved in administratum archives though heavily redacted, describes a single Galatus Dreadnaught holding a palace gate against waves of traitorous Astartes. The custodian within did not merely repel the attackers but engaged them with precision, each strike of his warblade cutting through the ranks with measured efficiency. When reinforcements eventually secured the sector, the gate remained intact, and the Galatus stood motionless amid the wreckage of enemy corpses. Another famous war machine, named in the archives as Valerian's Stand, is recorded in a sealed volume within the Segmentum Solar Command Library. This Galatus is said to have once been a warrior of such prominence among the Custodians that his interment was considered a moment of both mourning and celebration. Valerian's Stand participated in multiple defensive actions following the heresy, including the purging of demonic incursions along the palace catacombs. His name is remembered not only for battlefield accomplishment, but for his role in custodian councils, where his extended existence provided centuries of accumulated insight. Though the exact date of his final silence is unrecorded, references cease after the 32nd millennium, suggesting that even Auramite resilience cannot grant eternity. Deployment of Galatus dreadnoughts is always deliberate. They are never assigned to routine operations or minor conflicts. The Custodians reserve them for situations where both the symbolic and practical weight of their presence is required. This includes the defense of the Emperor's Sanctum, the repulsion of Xenos intrusions against Terra, and rare occasions where custodian forces are dispatched beyond the solar system. Each deployment signals the severity of the threat. For enemies, their presence communicates that what they face is not simply a defensive measure, but the embodiment of the Imperium's most irreplaceable protectors. For allies, it inspires certainty that the position will hold, no matter the scale of opposition. The practical method of deployment often involves placing Galatus dreadnoughts at focal points of defense. They are positioned at chokeholds, primary gates, or narrow corridors where their resilience and melee capacity can be most decisive. Unlike mobile strike units, they are not tasked with sweeping advances across battlefields. Instead, they serve as anchors that cannot be bypassed, absorbing enemy momentum until the rest of the custodian force can maneuver into position. This defensive doctrine reflects their essential role to safeguard, to hold, and to embody the immovable will of the Emperor's chosen. Behavioral instincts observed in Galatus dreadnoughts during combat differ subtly from those of Astartes' equivalents. Whereas an Astartes dreadnought may display bursts of aggression, surging into enemy lines with reckless fury, the Galatus acts with measured precision. Its movements are deliberate, its strikes calculated to neutralize threats with minimal waste. Witnesses often describe them as statues come to life, advancing without haste yet with inevitability. Even under withering fire, they do not falter or deviate from their course. This suggests that the custodian's discipline remains intact within the machine, his training in patience and precision magnified by the dreadnought's durability. There are also records of Galatus dreadnoughts coordinating instinctively with living custodians in ways that surpass standard battlefield communication. Neural integration allows the interred warrior to anticipate the movements of his brethren, aligning his strikes with their maneuvers as if part of a single organism. This synchronization reflects the custodian ethos of unity and vigilance, where every action is calculated to serve the Emperor's defense. In practice, it results in a battlefield presence that feels seamless, machine and flesh operating together without visible distinction. The tendency of Galatus Dreadnoughts to remain calm under fire has further psychological effects. Enemies often describe them as implacable, seemingly unaffected by damage that would cripple other war engines. The auramite plating, combined with layered shielding, allows them to ignore small arms fire entirely, and endure even heavy ordnance longer than expected. Their deliberate advance in the face of overwhelming force has been known to break enemy morale, for it conveys the impression that resistance is futile. This aura of inevitability is as much a weapon as the warblade they carry. Despite their resilience, Galatus Dreadnoughts are not invulnerable. Records do exist of their destruction, usually under extreme circumstances involving concentrated heavy fire or the intervention of warp-empowered adversaries. Yet even in these instances, their behaviour is marked by final acts of defiance. One account tells of a Galatus that, when immobilised by catastrophic damage, detonated its failing reactor in controlled release, annihilating the advancing enemy and denying them victory. Such actions reinforce the perception that even in destruction, a Galatus fulfills its mandate of guardianship. The fame of individual Galatus Dreadnoughts grows not from widespread service, but from singular decisive moments. Because they are deployed so rarely, each appearance is magnified in significance. Their reputation spread among enemies and allies alike, becoming part of the broader mythology of the Custodians. Yet it is important to note that within the Order itself, fame is a secondary concern. The Custodians do not elevate individuals for glory. A Galatus is remembered for his deeds not because he seeks renown, but because his continued existence embodies the unbroken vigilance of the Imperium's first guardians. In terms of lifestyle and identity, the behaviour of a Galatus during non-combat periods reinforces his alignment with Custodian discipline. He stands sentry within the palace, patrols restricted corridors, or attends councils, always maintaining awareness and readiness. He is never relegated to silence or torpor unless damaged beyond immediate repair. This constant activity means that his combat instincts are honed continuously, without the disorientation or sluggishness that can affect Astartes' dreadnoughts, awakened from centuries of slumber. Thus, when battle comes, the Galatus is already alert, already prepared, his instincts sharpened by unending vigilance. The cumulative picture formed from historical records, eyewitness testimony, and suppressed archives presents the Galatus Dreadnought as a construct that is both war machine and enduring custodian. Famous examples illustrate their effectiveness. Their deployment reveals deliberate purpose, and their combat behaviour demonstrates calm inevitability. Together, these qualities define not merely a variant of dreadnought technology, but a manifestation of the custodian philosophy itself, patient, precise, and eternal in its service to the Emperor. The Galatus Dreadnought presents itself in the records of the Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus as a singular anomaly within the Imperial war machine. Unlike the more common chassis of the Astartes Dreadnought classes, the Galatus is treated in formal reports less as a standardized battle asset and more as an exceptional relic whose existence defies normal accounting processes. Administratum logisters consistently note that such engines do not appear in traditional muster rolls, nor do they occupy the same categories as Legion-specific war gear, vehicles, or heavy armour. Instead, they are recorded in irregular annexes or sealed subsections of inventory ledgers, their presence often accompanied by commentary highlighting the extraordinary difficulty of reconciling their data within otherwise rigid frameworks. A reoccurring pattern emerges within these records, where scribes state outright that the Galatus cannot be accurately counted, requisitioned, or audited in the same way other Imperial assets can, because the Adeptus Custodes refuse all standardized codification. The Mechanicus view them with a blend of reverence and irritation. While many Magi acknowledge the beauty of their engineering and the effectiveness of their martial application, there is also a deep frustration reflected in various communiques that the Galatus pattern is wholly beyond their jurisdiction. Unlike the Contemptor or Derideo, which exist in multiple forge records and are supported by technical schematics that can be distributed for servicing, the Galatus is entirely excluded from such processes. Its core systems are maintained within the sealed manufactories of Terra itself, under the direct custodianship of the Emperor's Chosen. Thus, no outside forge can claim to have produced, refurbished, or even fully examined one of these machines. For the Mechanicus, this exclusion represents a wound to their universal mandate, for it establishes a precedent where a category of sacred machinery exists permanently outside the Omnissiah's priesthood. Logistical findings consistently underscore the rarity of deployment. Administratum tallies from major conflicts show the number of confirmed battlefield appearances of Galatus. Dreadnoughts never exceeds a handful per campaign, even in theatres of extreme significance. For example, in the most catastrophic incursions within the Segmentum Solar, when even Titan Legios and entire chapters of Space Marines were mobilized, the Galatus were recorded in numbers no greater than 2 or 3 across all fronts. This low frequency of deployment leads analysts to conclude that the Galatus are preserved in a state of deliberate underuse, committed only when scenarios threaten to escalate beyond the scope of ordinary Imperial forces. In this sense, they are not factored into general battle planning or supply chains at all. Rather, they are classified as unpredictable assets, impossible to forecast, yet devastating when they appear. From a numerical standpoint, the Administratum has often attempted to assign approximate weights, sizes, and material costs to the Galatus in order to produce logistical models for comparison against other armoured constructs. The results are highly imprecise. Early estimates suggest a fully armed Galatus stands at approximately 4 meters taller than the average Contemptor and outweighs it by several tons, though discrepancies in height measurements range by as much as half a meter, depending on the scribe's source. Armament loadouts are likewise difficult to pin down, with most records agreeing on the presence of advanced spear or guardian weaponry equivalents, but diverging on the precise energy consumption rates of such systems. Some Adeptus Mechanicus analysts even note that the energy-to-output ratio appears suspiciously efficient, leading to speculation that the Galatus may house arcane or archaeotech power conduits that exceed the performance of even the most advanced reactor cores available to the Legions Astartes. Such statements are often flagged for censure, suggesting that discussion of the Galatus' superiority over Mechanicum-sanctioned war gear may tread too close to heresy. In terms of logistical maintenance, Administratum inspectors regularly emphasize that the Galatus cannot be treated as a consumable war machine. Its life cycle is not one of deployment, repair, and eventual replacement, but rather of ongoing custodianship. Every record reviewed indicates that each Galatus is treated as a permanent and irreplaceable relic, with specialized attendants within the Custodes ranks, tasked exclusively with overseeing the sarcophagus, power systems, and armor seals. Mechanicum representatives are rarely, if ever, permitted to contribute to these procedures. The reluctance to allow outside intervention is explained in part by the Custodes' broader philosophy, which regards their tools as extensions of their divine mandate. Where Astartes might allow a tech marine to treat a dreadnought as a vehicle to be serviced, the Custodes view the Galatus as a fusion of warrior and relic so sacred that outside contact risks defilement. Thus, logistical chains are simplified not by efficiency, but by exclusion. Since no outside forge is involved, no supply network is required. The Galatus is maintained internally, its needs invisible to Imperial quartermasters. In battle reports, the Galatus is consistently described as a force whose presence destabilizes predictive models. Administratum tacticians attempting to calculate battle outcomes using the standardized tithing and readiness frameworks often find their projections disrupted when a Galatus intervenes. For example, in one compiled dossier on solar orbit defenses, projections estimated catastrophic losses in orbital station manpower during a demonic incursion. Yet, once a Galatus was confirmed on site, the survival rate of the defense force increased dramatically, exceeding even the optimistic forecast by a factor of 2. The scribe responsible for the analysis concluded that the statistical effect of a Galatus on a battlefield could not be modelled using conventional frameworks. It required its own category, one reserved for near absolute certainty of localized superiority. This in turn complicates Administratum predictions, as including the Galatus in projections skews data so heavily that models lose applicability to normal theatres of war. The Mechanicus attempt to analyse battlefield performance face similar obstacles. Field readings often contradict the expected tolerances of the chassis. For instance, thermal output measurements taken during extended campaigns suggest that the Galatus operates at efficiency ratios well beyond the capacity of known cooling systems. Likewise, structural endurance tests indicate that its auramite frame absorbs kinetic punishment on a scale comparable to Titan's many times its size. The inability to reconcile these results with the known limits of metallurgy has led several Mechanicum magi to propose that auramite itself functions as more than a mere alloy. Instead, it may act as a reactive substrate capable of redistributing force at a microstructural level. Such theories are swiftly suppressed, either by custodian representatives or by higher authorities within the Mechanicum, who prefer to avoid highlighting areas where their scientific dominion is challenged. Beyond the battlefield, Administratium record keepers note the strain that even a single Galatus deployment places upon documentation efforts. Unlike Titans, which are assigned detailed battle numbers and follow comprehensive deployment rituals, the Galatus often appears in records abruptly, with little forewarning, and vanishes again just as suddenly. These discontinuities complicate the production of after-action reports, as field scribes frequently discover that by the time data is compiled, the Galatus in question has already returned to Terra, leaving no traceable maintenance or recovery trail. Thus, Administratum ledgers often contain gaps, where a war machine of extraordinary impact is acknowledged but then disappears without proper bureaucratic closure. Some commentators within the archives even suggest that this is deliberate, a way for the Custodes to deny the Administratum the satisfaction of fully possessing their data. Mechanicus findings also emphasize the behavioral anomalies of the Galatus when compared to other dreadnoughts. Unlike their Astartes equivalents, which display a measure of personality reflective of the interred warrior, the Galatus is often described in Mechanicum logs as exhibiting an eerie consistency. Combat data indicates that regardless of pilot, every Galatus maintains almost identical combat rhythms, reaction times, and tactical decisions. This has led to heated debates among magi. Some argue that the Custodes' perfectionist genecraft results in a uniformity of response, while others theorize that the Galatus sarcophagus contains augmentation systems that override individual variants, effectively reducing the warrior within to a flawless extension of the machine. From the perspective of logistical prediction, this uniformity is paradoxically helpful. Since performance is consistent, battlefield outcomes can be more easily modelled, but it raises profound questions about the degree of autonomy retained by the interred custodian. Despite the gaps and contradictions, the Administratum ultimately records the Galatus as a force multiplier of the highest magnitude. In official capacity, this designation carries weight equivalent to Titan deployments, even though the Galatus is never formally assigned such classification. For the Mechanicus, the findings remain incomplete, always coloured by a mixture of awe and exclusion. The recurring conclusion of their analytics is one of frustration. The Galatus exists as an apex artifact of the Emperor's design, closed off to further study, and thus stands as a permanent reminder of the limitations imposed upon their dominion by the Adeptus Custodes. In this way, both Administratum and Mechanica archives treat the Galatus as something apart. It is a dreadnought, but not of the same order as those they catalogue daily. It is a war machine, but one whose logistics and analytics cannot be reconciled with the norms of imperial warfare. Every attempt to capture it within bureaucratic or technical frameworks produces distortions, gaps, or contradictions. And so, within the halls of the Imperium's record keepers, the Galatus is preserved not as a standardized entry but as an exception, an outlier that sits at the intersection of faith, science, and mystery, resistant to codification, yet undeniably real in its devastating presence on the field of war. Within the restricted annals of the Administratum and the data tombs of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Galatus Dreadnought appears sparingly in war records, but its presence is always marked with disproportionate impact. Where most war machines are chronicled with exhaustive precision, The Galatus is instead often referenced in fragmented reports, secondary annotations, or sealed margins of campaign rolls. This lack of standardization does not imply insignificance. Rather, it reflects deliberate obfuscation by the Adeptus Custodes, whose operational secrecy ensures that only glimpses of these engagements survive within broader archives. Nevertheless, the fragments that remain paint a consistent picture of a construct whose battlefield effectiveness exceeds the measurable parameters of its contemporaries. The earliest confirmed battle reports involving the Galatus are drawn from the waning years of the Great Crusade, when the Custodians themselves were occasionally deployed beyond the Sol system to safeguard the Emperor's will in especially sensitive campaigns. One such instance is preserved in fragmented accounts of the Zaranthan compliance. Mechanicum field observers describe the sudden insertion of Custodian forces against a hostile human empire whose psychic experimentation threatened to spiral into uncontrolled warp phenomena. While the Astartes prosecuted the majority of the campaign, a single Galatus is recorded in combat against the Zaranthian War Titans, massive proto-Titanic engines that predated the Legio Titanicus standard template. The Galatus's role, though only faintly documented, is described as a direct countermeasure, its Guardian Spear weaponry penetrating shielding matrices that had proven resistant to conventional Astartes' heavy support. The battle log ends abruptly, with the notation that the enemy's primary engine collapsed within 27 minutes of first contact. For Mechanicus analysts, this encounter remains a cornerstone example of the Galatus's ability to neutralize threats beyond the scale normally assigned to a dreadnought chassis. During the heresy itself, references to the Galatus become rarer still. The Siege of Terra provides the richest archive, though much remains classified. Surviving scribe rolls describe at least 3 confirmed Galatus Dreadnaughts engaged in the defense of the Eternity Wall spaceport, the Lion's Gate, and within the inner sanctums of the Imperial Palace. The Eternity Wall records are the most detailed, preserving a fragmented account of a Galatus engaging traitor, Legiones Astartes, armoured columns. Observers noted that the Dreadnaught's fighting style emphasized relentless forward momentum, with auramite plating shrugging off missile strikes that would have crippled lesser machines. Its Guardian Spear cleaved through Land Raider hulls with an efficiency described as surgical. The battle concluded with the destruction of no fewer than 11 armoured transports and an indeterminate number of traitor infantry, though the Galatus itself vanished from records immediately after the engagement. Analytical reconstructions of these encounters emphasize a fighting style markedly distinct from Astartes' dreadnoughts. Where the latter rely on calculated firepower exchanges and controlled aggression, the Galatus appears to embody a philosophy of implacable advance. Combat reports suggest that the dreadnought rarely halts to engage at range for extended periods, instead using its firepower only as suppression before closing for decisive melee strikes. This combination of range disruption and devastating close assault mirrors the broader Custodian combat doctrine, wherein overwhelming skill and perfection of execution compensate for numerical inferiority. Observers consistently describe the Galatus as operating with precision timing, striking exactly at the moment when enemy cohesion falters, and driving wedges into formations that result in cascading collapse. Later records, though fragmentary, place Galatus dreadnoughts in several campaigns against Xenos threats. The Hrud incursions of the early Millennia 36 include one such account, preserved by Mechanicus xenologist observers. A single Galatus deployed alongside Custodian kill teams into a collapsing segmentum frontier, where Hrud phase distortions had rendered conventional armoured units unreliable. While tanks and artillery malfunctioned under temporal stress, the Galatus appeared unaffected, its systems maintaining synchronization despite local reality shifts. It advanced into the densest concentrations of Hrud entities, its spear weapon discharging arcs of destructive energy that disrupted phase fields and forced the Xenos into corporeal instability. The entire incursion was resolved in less than 3 standard days. Administratum commentary emphasizes the symbolic importance of the deployment. While Astartes and Guard regiments had already been committed, the arrival of the Galatus was interpreted as a signal that failure would not be tolerated. Perhaps the most heavily analysed post-heresy deployment occurred during the War of the Beast in Millennia 32. While Custodes rarely fought outside the Sol system in this era, Administratum sources confirm at least one Galatus was committed during the desperate defence of Luna against Orc assault fleets. A sealed report, partially declassified for Mechanicus study, describes the Galatus engaging an Orc Gargant on the Mare Imbrium plains. Despite its size disadvantage, the Dreadnought closed distance under concentrated fire, weathering the onslaught of crude energy weaponry before disabling the Gargant with a strike that pierced its reactor core. Subsequent detonation destroyed much of the Orc formation, halting their advance on critical manufactories. Mechanicus observers noted that the Dreadnaught's efficiency in neutralising the Gargant exceeded projections for Titan-class responses, leading to quiet debate about whether Galatus-class engines could be considered functional substitutes for God machines under certain circumstances. The conclusion, however, was that their rarity precluded such strategic roles. Beyond singular confrontations, battle records also reveal patterns in how the Galatus coordinates with Custodian formations. Unlike Astartes' Dreadnaughts, which are often treated as independent or semi-autonomous units, the Galatus is described as functioning seamlessly within shield companies. Its movements appear to integrate with squad-level maneuvers, advancing in perfect synchrony with Custodian infantry, and leveraging its bulk to provide both cover and shock impact at critical junctures. Reports from the siege of the Imperial Palace emphasize this synergy. Custodian spear lines would advance in concert with the Galatus, using its armoured form as a mobile bulwark, while it simultaneously created breaches for infantry to exploit. This integration suggests not only tactical discipline, but also a degree of instinctive coordination, raising further questions about the cognitive link between pilot and machine. Mechanicus battle analytics frequently return to the subject of precision. Thermal logs indicate that the Galatus rarely wastes energy expenditure. Each strike, whether ranged or melee, achieves decisive outcomes. For example, in one detailed record of a skirmish during the defense of the Sol system in Millennia 41, a Galatus eliminated 5 Eldar Wraithguard constructs in rapid succession. Observers remarked on its ability to predict and counter the Eldars' speed, intercepting their maneuvers with uncanny anticipation. Such precision is attributed in some Mechanicus papers to advanced targeting systems integrated with the Custodian pilot's neural processes, though these systems remain inaccessible for direct study. One of the recurring tendencies noted in battle observations is the Dreadnaught's apparent indifference to attrition. Unlike Astartes' equivalents, whose combat logs reveal varying degrees of hesitation or tactical withdrawal, the Galatus is almost never recorded as retreating once engaged. This behavioural consistency has led Administratum analysts to classify them as non-withdrawal assets, a designation reserved only for certain Titan Legio and Custodian formations. Whether this stems from the will of the interred Custodian, the combat protocols of the machine, or a fusion of both remains uncertain. Regardless, the psychological effect on allies and enemies alike is significant. For Imperial defenders, the sight of a Galatus advancing undeterred inspires confidence. For enemies, it induces collapse of morale. The scarcity of their deployment means that each recorded battle acquires disproportionate attention in the archives. Administratum scribes tasked with compiling after-action accounts often remark on the difficulty of reconciling such events with conventional frameworks. For instance, during the minor but significant intervention on Varus Prime, a Galatus is said to have turned the tide of a rebellion that had resisted Imperial suppression for 7 years. The Dreadnaught's appearance on the battlefield reportedly collapsed the insurgent leadership within a single day. While details remain sparse, the Administratum calculated that the intervention saved the Imperium no fewer than 5 full regiments in projected losses, a cost-benefit analysis that reinforced the conclusion that the Galatus is among the most efficient instruments of war ever fielded. Despite the fragmentary nature of these records, a composite picture emerges. The Galatus fights as a living embodiment of Custodian doctrine, direct, overwhelming, precise, and absolute. Its combat behaviour mirrors that of the Custodians themselves, a relentless forward drive, an expectation of inevitability, and a refusal to acknowledge the possibility of defeat. Each battle entry confirms the same tendencies: precision of strike, synergy with shield companies, immunity to attrition, and an aura of inevitability that transforms tactical outcomes far beyond what a single machine might otherwise achieve. The Galatus Dreadnought appears in only scattered entries beyond the most famous campaigns already documented, but a handful of lesser-known wars and battle records add important detail to its operational history. Many of these fragments come from administratum scribes working with incomplete battlefield reports, or Mechanicus Magi cataloguing technical anomalies observed during deployments. Taken together, these scattered notes provide further insight into how the Galatus has functioned across millennia and how its aftermath is evaluated once the battles conclude. One of the earliest of these supplementary records comes from the aftermath of the Battle of Scoria's Crown during the later stages of the Great Crusade. Scoria's Crown was a rebellious mining system whose ruling elite refused compliance and whose planetary defences were bolstered by immense subterranean fortresses. Astartes from the Imperial Fists led the main assault, yet one redacted Mechanicus entry confirms that a Galatus Dreadnought was also present. The logs indicate its primary function was to breach the reinforced subterranean gates that had resisted even Legion siege artillery. The Galatus advanced into the blast tunnels, where limited space nullified much of the Astartes' vehicle support. It is recorded that the auramite plating withstood extended melter fire, while the Guardian Spear functioned as both cutting tool and weapon, dismantling reinforced gate seals that were otherwise considered impenetrable. After the engagement, Mechanicus analysts highlighted how the Custodian war machine preserved significant Legion casualties by removing what would have otherwise been a protracted and attritional grind. Other minor campaigns, such as the suppression of the Ulixis Rebellion in the 33rd millennium, feature similar fragments. Here, administratum notes suggest that the appearance of a Galatus on the battlefield immediately broke organised resistance. The rebels, largely comprised of former Imperial Guard regiments turned separatist, surrendered en masse when confronted by the advancing construct. The records emphasise that no prolonged battle took place. The Galatus' mere presence achieved a psychological effect sufficient to end the conflict. Analysts concluded that the Custodians leveraged this intimidation as a calculated tool, ensuring that wider collateral destruction was avoided and the rebellion extinguished with minimal disruption to Imperial resource flow. Beyond human insurrections, Galatus dreadnoughts are occasionally mentioned in wars against Xenos adversaries. A particular case appears in Mechanicus Sinologis archives documenting a battle against the Rakghoul in the Segmentum Obscurus. The Rakghoul's berserker-style assaults often overwhelm Imperial forces by sheer ferocity, but in this record a Galatus fought at the centre of an embattled Custodian formation. The Rakghoul, unfazed by conventional intimidation, continued to press against it in swarming numbers. Observers recorded that the Dreadnought sustained prolonged melee engagement, methodically dismantling wave after wave of attackers without deviation in pace or precision. After 6 hours of constant fighting, the Rakghoul assault collapsed, their cohesion destroyed. The aftermath was catalogued as unusual, as Mechanicus field logicians noted that the Dreadnought systems displayed almost no measurable stress, suggesting extraordinary efficiency in energy transfer and internal durability. Another incident is tied to the defense of Nemesis Terra during the 13th Black Crusade. While the majority of forces committed to that campaign were Astartes chapters and Imperial Guard regiments, sealed administratum reports acknowledged the intervention of Custodian units at critical junctures. In one engagement, a Galatus was deployed to secure a warp rift breach that had vomited demonic entities directly into the defensive lines. Where guard units faltered under the psychic and physical assault, the Galatus advanced alone into the breach, its guardian spear casting arcs of searing energy that dispersed warp spawn. The report is careful to note that demonic manifestations dissolved at contact, indicating a possible anti-warp resonance effect integrated into the Galatus's weapon systems. The breach was sealed and the position held. The Aftermath entry records the measurable reduction in demonic activity in the surrounding kilometers, leading Mechanicus xenologists, researchers to speculate that Galatus wargear functions at a level specifically calibrated against entities of the Immaterium. The pattern that emerges across these additional battles is consistent. Galatus dreadnoughts appear only at critical junctures, are deployed in extremely limited numbers, and often achieve outcomes disproportionate to their presence. Administratum evaluations repeatedly return to the same conclusion. A single Galatus saves the Imperium not only through direct battlefield impact, but also through the chain of consequences it prevents. Protracted sieges, prolonged attrition, and destabilization of supply routes are often avoided entirely once a Galatus is committed. Aftermath studies, preserved in the analytical annals of the Administratum, emphasize these broader logistical effects. The Scoria's Crown campaign, for example, ended several months earlier than initial projections, freeing Imperial fist detachments for redeployment to other compliance actions. The Elixis Rebellion, instead of dragging into years of low-level insurgency, was quelled in a single confrontation, preventing further disruption to local tithes. The Rakgol assault on Segmentum Obscurus trade routes was blunted before it could escalate into a sustained war of attrition, preserving naval resources. Each of these cases demonstrates that the impact of a Galatus deployment must be measured not only in immediate battlefield casualties but in systemic Imperial stability. Mechanicus records add further layers to this analysis. Technical logicians often study Galatus aftermaths for evidence of performance degradation, yet repeated entries confirm minimal mechanical stress. In contrast to Astartes' dreadnoughts, which frequently require extensive overhaul after significant deployments, the Galatus is consistently returned to operational readiness with comparatively minor maintenance. This durability reduces downtime and increases availability, though its rarity means this advantage cannot be leveraged at scale. Still, for the Adeptus Mechanicus, these observations affirm the Custodians' mastery over technology, beyond even their own capacity, further justifying the secrecy that surrounds the Galatus construction and maintenance. The aftermath also includes psychological evaluations, though these are rarely accessible in unredacted form. When included, they consistently highlight the dual effect of the Galatus. Allies are emboldened, enemies demoralized. The Elixis Rebellion's rapid surrender is only the most extreme example. Even in protracted conflicts such as the Rakgol engagement, the collapse of enemy morale after repeated failed assaults demonstrates that the Galatus is as much a psychological weapon as a physical one. Administratum strategists have classified its effect as deterrent escalation. The knowledge that a Galatus may be committed to a conflict exerts pressure on hostile forces even before its actual deployment. Yet the aftermath also raises questions. In several entries, Mechanicus observers speculate on whether the Galatus's apparent immunity to attrition and fatigue is sustainable in the long term. Although its performance seems consistent across millennia, occasional gaps in the record suggest that individual dreadnoughts are eventually lost, silenced, or withdrawn from service. Administratum scribes note that no single Galatus appears continuously across the entire span of Imperial history. Instead, references emerge sporadically, tied to particular events, then vanish. This absence complicates long-term analytics and implies a finite operational lifespan, even if far greater than other dreadnought patterns. The cumulative analysis of additional wars and their aftermath presents a profile that is both remarkable and constrained. On one hand, the Galatus delivers battlefield outcomes that exceed standard projections, preserving Imperial resources and stability. On the other, its scarcity ensures that these benefits remain rare, restricted to moments of absolute necessity. Administratum projections suggest that if even a dozen Galatus dreadnoughts could be fielded in concert, the outcome of entire sector wars might shift decisively. Mechanicus logicians have even theorized, in sealed speculation, that a full cohort of Galatus war machines could equal or surpass the operational effect of a Titan maniple. But such projections remain theoretical, as the Adeptus Custodes never commit their rarest. Administratum projections suggest that if even a dozen Galatus Dreadnaughts could be fielded in concert, the outcome of entire sector wars might shift decisively. Mechanicus logicians have even theorized, in sealed speculation, that a full cohort of Galatus war machines could equal or surpass the operational effect of a Titan maniple. But such projections remain theoretical, as the Adeptus Custodes never commit their rarest assets in such numbers. Thus, the aftermath evaluations consistently return to a single conclusion. The Galatus is not a tool of conquest but of preservation. It is deployed not to expand the Imperium but to safeguard its most essential strongholds and prevent destabilization at the highest levels. Every aftermath analysis reflects this underlying truth. The Galatus exists not for the Imperium as a whole, but for the throne at its center. The Inquisition, whose mandate stretches across the Imperium in matters of heresy, Xenos contamination, and the unseen tendrils of the warp, has always maintained a wary eye toward the Adeptus Custodes. Unlike the open yet veiled bureaucracy of the Adeptus Administratum or the religious fervour of the ecclesiarchy, the Custodians represent a silent and unyielding power, guardians not only of the Emperor's corporeal shell upon the Golden Throne, but also of his spiritual will. It is within this context that the Contemptor Galatus Dreadnought, a device seldom witnessed by outsiders, has become a point of intrigue for the Inquisition. The Galatus Dreadnought is unique, not merely because it embodies the warframe of a custodian entombed within, but because it manifests a union of technology, ritual, and genecraft that borders upon the miraculous. Inquisition records show that these machines, while officially described as rare assets deployed during existential crises, have elicited repeated commentary from field operatives, savants, and Ordo specialists alike. The impressions vary in tone, from reverence and awe to suspicion and outright alarm, yet all agree that these constructs defy simple categorization. Reports from inquisitorial observers embedded within joint campaigns or stationed on Terra itself describe the Galatus Dreadnought as less a war machine and more an extension of imperial divinity. One Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor, present during the repulsion of a Chaos raiding force on the edge of the Sol system, wrote that the Galatus he observed moved with a precision that mocked the laws of inertia. He noted that the machine did not lumber like an Astartes dreadnought, but seemed to pivot, advance, and strike with an uncanny fluidity that suggested not only mastery of war, but also a refinement bordering upon artistry. Other accounts emphasize the psychological impact of these machines. Soldiers of the Astra Militarum reported heightened morale merely upon sight of the Galatus, describing its form as a god of war carved in metal and gold. Contrastingly, some agents reported that proximity to the machine invoked unease, a sensation that the dreadnought itself was aware, observing not just the battlefield, but the inner workings of every ally and foe around it. Such impressions have been logged multiple times by unrelated observers, raising questions about the machine's sensory capabilities, whether mechanical, psychic, or something more elusive. The Adeptus Mechanicus, when pressed by inquisitorial interrogatives, have offered sanitized data concerning the Galatus chassis. They claim it shares a lineage with the Contemptor patterns of the Great Crusade, albeit extensively modified and refined for custodian integration. Yet discrepancies abound. Tech priests embedded within inquisitorial retinues have noted that the machine's power draw, cooling systems, and even mass distribution calculations contradict known laws of Mechanicus design. The Galatus is, by all available data, heavier than an Astartes Contemptor variant by nearly 25%, yet field observations demonstrate movement speeds equal to or surpassing its lighter cousin. One Ordo Xenos archivist posited that the chassis may incorporate materials not catalogued within Mechanicus records, or possibly drawn from caches of ancient Dark Age of technology relics. The notion was promptly redacted, though the unsealed preliminary file remains in certain restricted vaults. Such redactions are not unusual in Inquisition documentation, but highlight the level of unease these machines cause, even among those trained to confront the inexplicable. Multiple records describe battlefield anomalies when Galatus Dreadnoughts are present. These are not overt psychic displays, but subtle irregularities that defy conventional explanation. In one recorded campaign against the Orcs in Segmentum Pacificus, Vox transmissions from Astra Militarum units reported pauses in enemy momentum when the Galatus advanced. Data analysis later confirmed that Orc charge formations faltered and hesitated despite lacking any visible cause. Some inquisitorial observers theorized the machine projected a suppressive psychological aura. Others suggested it was the mere presence of a custodian within. However, a minority report considered the possibility that the machine's unknown systems exerted a disruptive effect upon the electromagnetic spectrum or warp resonance in the area. Further examples are scattered across archives: munitions failing to detonate when striking the Galatus, enemy command structures collapsing in disarray at its approach, and battlefield outcomes skewing disproportionately when even a single unit was deployed. While none of these incidents constitute direct evidence of supernatural interference, their recurrence suggests a pattern that unsettles inquisitorial analysts. Perhaps most disquieting to the Inquisition is the silence of the Adeptus Custodes on the matter. Where the Adeptus Astartes may at least begrudgingly share tactical data concerning their dreadnoughts, the Custodians offer nothing. Attempts by Ordo Magos authorized inspectors to study a Galatus chassis post-battle have been uniformly denied. On one occasion, an inquisitor of the Order Malleus attempted to requisition temporary access to a damaged Galatus for study, only to have the Custodians refuse outright and escort the inquisitor from the palace perimeter. The refusal was absolute, and no higher authority intervened on the inquisitor's behalf. The message was clear: even the Inquisition does not possess the authority to pry into these constructs. This refusal has bred paranoia within certain inquisitorial circles. Some see it as a tacit admission that the Galatus houses secrets which cannot withstand scrutiny. Others argue it is simply another extension of the Custodians' well-established refusal to share knowledge beyond the Emperor's walls. Regardless, the denial fuels speculation, and speculation is the foundation upon which Inquisition fears are built. Among the most troubling findings are whispered theories that the Galatus Dreadnought represents more than a war machine. Some suspect that its origins are interwoven with the Emperor's private work during the Unification Wars, or even drawn from recovered Dark Age technologies deliberately excluded from Mechanicus canon. Others consider the possibility of psychic reinforcement mechanisms woven into its systems, artifacts not unlike the forbidden technologies once catalogued in the Ordo's Index Maleficarum. None of these claims are substantiated, yet their persistence across separate Ordo files suggests a collective unease that resists dismissal. One Ordo Hereticus report, locked within a sealed librarium, described the Galatus as an echo of the Emperor's personal hand in warfare, preserved and armoured to endure eternity. The phrasing implies that the Dreadnought may contain not merely a custodian, but also elements of design, will, or guidance beyond mortal comprehension. Whether metaphorical or literal, the language remains deeply unsettling for Inquisition analysts accustomed to parsing faith from fact. Though custodians entombed within these dreadnoughts are, by design, paragons of loyalty and strength, Inquisition files remark on peculiarities of behaviour during combat. Several observers describe an intensity bordering upon predatory instinct, sudden shifts in tempo, calculated pauses, and lethal execution that feel as though the dreadnought is toying with its prey. Such descriptions are unusual for custodians, who are otherwise characterized by efficiency, precision, and directness. Additionally, reports mention instances of warriors who fought alongside a Galatus recalling fragmented sensory impressions unrelated to the battlefield, images of golden halls, the sound of distant hymns, or visions of Terra itself. While these accounts could be dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations, their frequency raises questions. Did the Galatus transmit such impressions either psychically or through some unknown mechanism? If so, was it intentional or merely a byproduct of its operation? In collating these findings, the Inquisition has not reached consensus. The Ordo Xenos expresses concern that the Galatus represents hidden technologies withheld even from Mars. The Ordo Malleus notes potential warp interactions that, while not overtly heretical, skirt dangerously close to the anomalous. The Ordo Hereticus raises suspicion over the Custodians' refusal to grant access, interpreting their silence as an implicit admission of concealed truths. Yet despite the questions, one fact remains unchallenged. The Galatus Dreadnought is a weapon of absolute loyalty to the Emperor and the Custodes. Whatever mysteries it carries within its frame, no Inquisitor has yet dared accuse the Custodians of deviation, nor sought to confront them openly. For while the Inquisition's authority is vast, even it recognizes boundaries. The walls of the Imperial Palace and the war machines that guard them stand as one such line never to be crossed. The Galatus remains therefore an enigma, observed, recorded, whispered about, but never penetrated. It is at once a tool of war, a symbol of imperial supremacy, and a lingering riddle that unsettles even those trained to accept the inexplicable as routine. For the Inquisition, this is both a point of frustration and a grim reassurance. Some mysteries, after all, are perhaps best left unsolved. The Inquisition's record keepers have always been meticulous in their attempts to chart the irregularities of the Imperium's wars. In most cases, these anomalies are easily classified. The interference of the warp, the intrusion of Xenos technologies, or the distortion of time and perception that follows when psychers are pressed into service on the battlefield. Yet among the vast collection of irregularities preserved in inquisitorial data vaults, there exists a particular thread of entries that concern themselves not with alien forces or sorcerous corruption, but with the Adeptus Custodes' own Contemptor Galatus Dreadnoughts. Though these machines are few, their recorded appearances in war are often accompanied by strange results that cannot be explained through the ordinary calculus of logistics or weapon performance. The earliest of these inquisitorial anomalies can be traced to the pacification campaigns in the early 31st millennium, shortly after the close of the Horus Heresy. One record, preserved in redacted form, describes the intervention of a single Galatus during the clearing of the orbital holds of Luna. Traitor remnants entrenched themselves in the abandoned fortresses, supported by heavy engines, including at least one confirmed Warlord-class Titan. The surviving battle reports describe the Titan as collapsing mid-engagement without visible breach, its reactor silenced and its limbs frozen in place as though seized by an external force. The war machine was found intact, with no signs of external penetration, its machine spirit extinguished. The Galatus, advancing at close range when this event occurred, was observed continuing its march without deviation, unscathed by the storm of weaponry that had engulfed it minutes before. Adeptus Mechanicus analysis claimed that the Titan suffered catastrophic overload, though the lack of any burn traces or ruptured conduits makes such an explanation insufficient. The Inquisition quietly preserved this anomaly in its vaults, assigning it a level of restriction far beyond what the scale of the battle might otherwise warrant. In later millennia, other anomalies are found clustered around battles fought against alien powers. The Chimeros incursion of the 37th millennium provides one such case. Tyrannid bioforms descended upon the system, stripping colonies of their population with a merciless efficiency typical of their species. A Galatus was recorded advancing into the densest concentration of synapse organisms. The field outcome is remarkable. Instead of the usual acceleration of the swarm in response to a threat, the synapse creatures faltered, hesitated, and failed to coordinate their lesser kin. Witnesses from the Imperial Guard described the effect as though the swarm had forgotten itself, breaking into fragments without coherent order. The battle collapsed within hours, the splinter fleet's momentum lost. When field agents of the Inquisition compiled these testimonies, several suggested the Galatus emitted some unseen influence capable of disrupting Tyrannid command resonance. Such speculation was removed from the final administratum version of the report, yet the suppressed notes survive in inquisitorial holdings. The siege of the Bastion Spire on Damascus VI is another recorded encounter marked by unexplained irregularities. Chaos forces had entrenched themselves within the fortified hive, reinforcing their defences with sorcery and the unstable aid of warp manifestations. When the Galatus engaged, Vox interceptions from the traitor side spoke of sudden blindness, silence, and the feeling of emptiness within the warp itself. Imperial units reported nothing unusual beyond the expected ferocity of their advance, but the coherence of the enemy transmissions suggests that, at least for those bound to the warp, the arrival of the Galatus caused more than physical disruption. Many accounts describe a suppression effect that nullified demonic manifestations in its immediate path, as though the immaterial was being muted by its presence. Such reports are rarely trusted, yet the Inquisition preserved them under seal, considering the possibility too dangerous to ignore. The reclamation of Solstice Reach, conducted by custodian detachments in conjunction with guard regiments, provides another peculiar entry. The Galatus deployed their advance through artillery fire that, by all conventional measures, should have torn it apart. Shells detonated harmlessly short of its hull, not once or twice but consistently across hours of bombardment. The recordings captured by guard-picked operators showed the detonation suspended as though caught in unseen hands. Later Mechanicus reviews dismissed this as corruption of visual records caused by local atmospheric interference, yet multiple different feeds from different Vox units reproduce the same sequences, reducing the likelihood of identical corruption to negligible levels. A similar anomaly emerges in the cleansing of the Veil Rift, where orbital sensors of Imperial Navy ships experienced blank readings as the Galatus deployed on the surface. The battlefield appeared to vanish from auger sweeps, replaced not with interference but with complete absence, as though void had replaced the ground. The event lasted intermittently for hours, after which the sensors returned to normal. No custodian records acknowledge the occurrence, though inquisitorial cross-archives preserve the original Navy feeds in sealed form. The Fokrian Gates campaign, fought against one of the probing Black Crusades, provides perhaps the most troubling report. The system's astropathic channels destabilized precisely at the moment of the Galatus deployment. Choirs that had been holding stable contact across sectors reported sudden static, and even within sanctified relay chambers, psychers were driven to silence by psychic distortion. For several hours, the warp itself seemed to recede from the system, leaving a thinness that one Ordo Malleus psyker described as a vacuum in the immaterial. The timing of the phenomenon with the presence of the Galatus was noted by inquisitorial observers, though the official campaign annals omit the connection. These documented encounters are accompanied by a body of sealed reports, which contain even more disturbing material. One of these, referred to only as the Gerion Lock, concerns a Galatus that fought in the defense of Terra during the 32nd millennium. According to heavily redacted fragments, the Dreadnought maneuvered in perfect anticipation of battlefield developments, intercepting enemy assaults before they occurred and countering strikes at the moment they were conceived. Those present concluded that its behaviour bordered on precognition. Whether this was advanced predictive logic, the influence of the pilot's transhuman awareness, or something entirely outside mechanistic explanation, the question has never been answered. The report remains sealed with the joint approval of the Adeptus Custodes and the Inquisition. Another sealed file from Segmentum Obscurus describes a battlefield cleansed of demonic incursion. The Galatus present fought for hours against warp manifestations before silence fell. When inquisitorial investigators surveyed the site, they discovered an area where the warp itself had collapsed into absence. For days, no psychic manifestation was possible within the radius, and demonic summoning attempts failed without trace. The data collected by Mechanicus savants showed nothing. Empty registers where readings should have existed. Blank fields as though the instruments had never been activated. This file was locked almost immediately and marked with explicit prohibition against speculation. A final sealed report, known only by the designation Vault L987, describes an incident in which Custodes barred inquisitorial observers from examining a battlefield after Galatus deployment. All debris was removed, all ground sealed, and the Custodians themselves guarded the perimeter until the area was secured. When the Inquisition pressed for access, They were denied with the explanation that contamination protocols required isolation. The Inquisitors involved filed formal protests, yet their records were erased from most open registries. Only fragments of their testimony remain preserved in encrypted vaults. Across these many wars and encounters, a pattern emerges that the Inquisition cannot fully articulate but cannot ignore. The Galatus is associated with battlefield outcomes that defy probability, from the collapse of enemy command structures to the suppression of warp phenomena and the failure of mechanical systems in opposing engines. These events are too consistent to be dismissed as coincidence, yet their nature resists classification. The Dreadnought is not heretical, not tainted, not Xenos in origin. Its construction is sanctified, its lineage imperial, its operators the most trusted of the Emperor's chosen. And yet it produces effects that resemble miracles or distortions, depending on the perspective of the observer. For the Inquisition, this represents the most troubling element of all. They are trained to name threats, to categorize them, to label and then destroy. The Galatus fits none of these categories. Its anomalies are never exploited, never acknowledged, never explained. They simply occur, and the machine continues its duty, preserved by the silence of the Adeptus Custodes. The sealed reports pile higher with every millennium, and though many Inquisitors attempt to dismiss them as exaggeration or error, the accumulation leaves little room for doubt. The Galatus Dreadnought remains a war machine of unmatched resilience and ferocity, but in inquisitorial eyes it is also a cipher, a construct whose very presence unsettles the boundaries between the mechanical, the psychic, and the divine. On the battlefield it secures victory. In the archives it leaves questions that none are willing to ask openly. The following account is derived from sealed repositories within the Ordo Xenos, Ordo Hereticus, and Ordo Malleus, compiled under the designation Vault Reference, in Vigilata, Galatus, Sealed. Access to these records requires multiple tiers of authorization, not merely for reasons of state secrecy, but due to the nature of the subject itself. The Galatus pattern Custodes Dreadnought, though outwardly catalogued as a specialized war construct of the Emperor's personal guardians, contains layers of mystery and operational complexity that even the most senior Inquisitors have never fully resolved. What follows is a synthesis of fragmented transcripts, secured field observations, censored battle annals, and testimonies obtained under oath. The first matter that consistently emerges within these files is the nature of their silence. Unlike conventional Imperial records where the deployment of Titans, Baneblades, or even standard Astartes dreadnoughts is typically chronicled in functional detail, the Galatus construct appears almost as a ghost within the archives. Whole campaigns are documented without mention of their presence, only for later secondary reports to suggest their decisive influence. Administratum clerks attempting to reconcile battle losses frequently note discrepancies in scale and cause, only for their ledgers to be retroactively amended with vague allusions to custodian intervention. From the perspective of the Ordos, such obfuscation is not an accident of bureaucracy, but the direct result of deliberate erasure by the highest echelons of imperial governance. Classified dossiers repeatedly emphasize that only a limited number of Galatus dreadnoughts are confirmed to exist, yet the true figure remains impossible to fix. Some sealed documents estimate fewer than a dozen across the entirety of the 10,000. Others suggest a rolling tally, where a fallen custodian interred in one frame may replace another, with the prior machine quietly removed from record. One Ordo Malleus cipher, recovered from the archives of Radomir VII, chillingly states, "To count them is to misunderstand them. They are not numbered as machines, but recorded as continuations of oaths." Combat transcripts preserved under cipherlock classification reveal impressions that differ radically from Mechanicus assessments. Where the Mechanicus catalogue speaks of power cores, actuator strength, and weapon calibration, the Inquisition's field records emphasize phenomena that strain the boundaries of empirical categorization. Witnesses consistently describe the Galatus dreadnoughts as inevitably present on the field, even in cases where records show no confirmed redeployment from Terra. Teleportation technology, Custodies, strategic reserves, or even warp-adjacent translation are proposed as explanations, though none have been corroborated. The most common description is that they simply appear when the battle demands them, with no trail of transit or logistical footprint. Interrogation files gathered from surviving commanders shed further ambiguity. One captain of the Cadian 382nd, recorded after the siege of Arcanist Gate, stated that the Dreadnought did not advance as a machine, but as though the ground bent to its intent. Another officer, deposed after the Thulian rebellions, swore that his auspex displayed a null zone surrounding the construct, an area where no vox signal, no warp interference, and no psychic intrusion could penetrate. This zone travelled with the Galatus, extending outward in a shifting sphere that unsettled both allies and enemies alike. When cross-examined, tech priests denied such a field was possible within the machine's documented specifications, yet the testimony appears in multiple sources across unrelated campaigns. Some of the most disturbing sealed records pertain to their interaction with demonic adversaries. Reports from the Black Crusade counteractions list instances where warp entities simply recoiled in the Dreadnaught's presence, their cohesion destabilized without direct strikes. Accounts describe greater demons halting mid-assault as though repelled by an unseen anchor. A sealed fragment from Ordo Malleus Scholar Lord Henaros makes the claim, "The Galatus carries within it the echo of the throne's will. Its strike is not against flesh, but against the lie of unreality itself." This statement has been officially redacted, yet its survival in multiple parallel archives suggests deliberate preservation. The Inquisition also retained scattered files on their behaviour in aftermath scenarios. Unlike Astartes' dreadnoughts, which typically return to chapter holds for ritual maintenance, Galatus constructs are often absent from retrieval points. They vanish from the field after battle's end, whether withdrawn by the Custodians or removed by means unknown. Whole regiments testify that such machines strode into the horizon only to dissolve into dust-laden silence, never again recorded on that theatre. Administratum staff sent to document debris have consistently failed to locate physical remnants, despite records of catastrophic engagements where their armour should have been sundered. The Ordos interpret this either as evidence of near-miraculous resilience, or of mechanisms of withdrawal unavailable to conventional Imperial forces. Behavioural analysis remains inconclusive. Unlike the near-slumbering, contemplative states of Astartes interred within their sarcophagi, the custodian within a Galatus is described as fully alert, as though death's threshold has not dulled his faculties. In fact, sealed testimonies speak of voices carried across the voxnet, deep and commanding, not the distorted mechanical echoes typical of dreadnought systems. One field operator reported, "It was not a machine that spoke, it was a custodian, towering, golden, wrathful. The vox did not distort him, it amplified him." Such impressions complicate the distinction between man and machine, leading certain inquisitors to speculate whether the Galatus Dreadnought is less a sarcophagus and more an extension of the custodian's unbroken will. Conflicting sealed reports even question whether interment within the Galatus occurs at all. While most accounts insist it serves as a vessel for a grievously wounded custodian, a minority suggests the constructs are not inhabited in any conventional sense. These dissenting testimonies propose that the Galatus Dreadnaughts are powered by residual genetic echoes, fragments of the Emperor's own design within the custodian gene template, awakened under dire circumstance. In this interpretation, the Dreadnought is not a machine piloted by a fallen warrior, but a living extension of the Custodes order itself. Such speculation remains unconfirmed and highly suppressed, classified under forbidden hypotheses, Custodes Arcanum. Sealed redactions extend beyond simple military secrecy. One file of particular note, recovered from a vault beneath Sol's Hollow, documents an encounter during the cataclysm of Sindral's Reach. Local survivors described the dreadnought halting in the midst of a burning city, standing motionless for nearly 12 hours. During that time, enemy movements inexplicably ceased across a 20-kilometre radius, as though the opposing forces were entranced or paralysed. Afterward, the Dreadnought reanimated and resumed combat, leaving the stunned defenders to sweep through unopposed. The Mechanicus dismissed the account as hallucinatory trauma, yet the Inquisition preserved it under triple lock classification. No explanation has been provided for the phenomenon. Perhaps most unsettling are the silences embedded within sealed reports. Pages end mid-sentence, names are redacted to illegibility, entire battles are excised from collective record. These absences themselves function as a kind of testimony, revealing not merely what is known but what must never be revealed. In one instance, a Mechanicus observer attached to the Order Malleus recorded in her final Vox transmission, "The Dreadnought is not a weapon. It is a judgment made manifest. To witness it is to feel weighed." No further transmissions followed, and her body was never recovered. The Order's final considerations, as collated in the most restricted vaults, reflect not only the tactical value of the Galatus, but also the danger of its very comprehension. Where the Adeptus Astartes see their dreadnoughts as honoured brothers preserved beyond death, and where the Mechanicus interprets them as biomechanical engines, the Inquisition regards the Custodians Galatus Dreadnought as something else entirely, a category error, a phenomenon that defies the neat boundaries of flesh, machine, and divine. To classify it is to risk reducing its reality, and yet to leave it undefined courts equal peril. The closing entries of these classified files are written in the cautious language of unease. Inquisitors who have studied the Galatus extensively often recommend containment of knowledge rather than its dissemination. Their reasoning is simple: that too broad an awareness of such constructs might invite theological corruption, heretical reinterpretation, or even chaos exploitation. The Galatus Dreadnoughts, in their silence, are best preserved as myth, half-truth and legend, where their very uncertainty becomes a shield. Thus the Inquisition's perspective concludes not with certainty, but with deliberate obscurity. The Galatus Dreadnought is simultaneously real and hidden, witnessed yet erased, a paradox that only strengthens its aura as an instrument of the Emperor's most personal will. In the words of an anonymous Ordo Hereticus archivist preserved under the code Final Imprimatur Terra, "There are truths the Imperium cannot afford to know, and weapons it cannot afford to understand. The Galatus is both. It exists at the boundary between what is mortal and what is divine. Let no man pry deeper, for in his seeking he may find the silence where the throne itself gazes back.